supervisory authority, ESMA, which is the markets authority. And so for the first time, you have a regulator with specific responsibility for these agencies. The way that regulation develops and the kind of criteria that are used to regulate them is going to take, I think, a little time to develop and emerge. Thank you for the question. David, can I ask you to?
Again, I think lots of people you're absolutely right. To develop a culture in which ethics is taken seriously, it has to be about internal processes.
Just one minute, put the microphone to your mouth. I'm not sure people.
Is that on? To encourage, to develop a culture of taking things seriously, it has to be about internal processes. It has to be about ways of getting financial institutions to get people in financial institutions talking about ethics, to devise processes to take ethics seriously that are suitable for that financial institution. I also agree with the panel that externally imposed ethical standards such as fairness, integrity, even our proposal of taking externality seriously, raise problems for predictability and uncertainty. However, the problem is how do you get firms to take these internal processes seriously, to engage in conversations, to generate a culture that promotes an ethical outlook. One way to do that, of course, is indeed to externally impose and enforce standards such as fairness and integrity. And that's, in the United Kingdom, the approach that the Financial Services Authority has taken to the development of an ethical culture in the context of retail services. And I think with the proposal in paper, we can take that further and apply it also where we have sophisticated counterparties.
Thank you, Dan. Is there anything you'd like to add to that? Then I'm going to come on to the last question, which is, again, related to the paper, whether it's possible through regulation to alter and mold the culture of ethics of financial market practice in a way that goes beyond aspiration. I'm going to take a slightly different order this time, and I'll start, if I may, Roger.
Thank you. Well, let me answer it this way. We have no choice. As uncomfortable as it may be, most of us, if not all of us in this room, are who would be characterized by those outside as the 1%. And those outside would be putting themselves in 99%. And that sentiment is very strong in the American Parliament. I cannot underscore enough how much there is a sense of divide between the two sides. And it's not just based on a gut instinct. It's based on real statistics. Look at Gini coefficients around the world. Look at top-bottom ratios around the world. Look at absolute poverty levels around the world across the last 10, 20, 30 years. In most countries, those statistics have gotten far worse for the 99%. That's a fact. And whether we like to say it's true or not, the causal connection that's drawn is that we have not successfully changed the culture and practice in international finance, and I might add in trade as well, and in foreign direct investment sufficiently. In fact, practices seem to exacerbate the differences. So for me, I tried to answer the first three questions really very carefully according to the wording of the questions, but the fourth one, I would say we have no choice. It's a challenge we have to face.
I cannot agree more with what Professor Bala has just said. Coming from a country where we have successfully held on to our democracy despite all odds, perception and public confidence in governance is very important. Growing disparities have created huge social tensions. We really don't have a choice. The global meltdown may have not affected Indian banks, but it certainly affected the Indian economy. And the perception that unregulated markets generally, unregulated trade generally, and unregulated financial institutions specifically are responsible for part of the malaise is undeniable. Whether it is true, and if true to what extent, it doesn't really matter. I don't think, therefore, we have a choice. There has to be a degree of regulation. There has to be, by law, an area created, and I don't see a necessary antithesis between law and, on the one side, and ethics and cultural standards on the other. Law can be based on standards. You can have laws, for example, which provide for ethical reviews by juries of your own peers. They can function under a statutory regime. It doesn't necessarily have to be external. It can be internal, but under a statutory framework. You must have, and what the world must have now, is global standards, certain global standards by which trade is done, by which financial institutions work, so that you don't have shifting from onshore to offshore, just because one regulatory regime becomes tighter than the other. And I think we have reached a point in the world, and certainly in developing countries which are keeping democracy in place such as ours, to have these standards, to have these ethics translated into some kind of regulatory regime, so that public confidence